Welcome to Associated Renewables Financing Energy Efficiency Project Seminar, or webinar rather. We are Associated Renewable. Today's presentation will be done by me, Juan Lois. I am the Financial Analyst, Grants and Proposal Specialist here at Associated Renewable. First of all, if you could please put your speaker on mute and cell phones on silent. And if you have a question, just feel free to ask it at any time. So just a little bit about us. We are a full-service energy consulting and carbon management firm. We offer custom energy efficiency solutions, renewable energy technologies to help our clients deploy their projects, expertise to meet regulatory requirements, and solutions to cut energy costs while reducing their overall carbon footprint. Now, just a little bit about energy efficiency. Basically, it's a smart way to save money and help save the environment as well. There are energy retrofits, which are a highly effective approach for reducing energy consumption, costs, and greenhouse gas emissions. Now, we provide you with a simplified process, some industry insights, and financial advice to meet your energy efficiency goals. Now, the New York market is highly fragmented. There's variation in building size, use, age, and energy intensity. Financial incentives for energy retrofits vary by project type and time. Incentives are available to finance energy projects of all types. And typically, after performing a property assessment, we can determine which funding opportunity, such as grants, rebates, tax credits, and renewable energy certificates that might be applicable. We do guide you through all the energy regulations, and we help you leverage the city, state, and federal programs to finance your energy efficiency projects. Now, for energy retrofit projects, there's a number of financing options available. Some of them include internal funding, there's traditional loans from lenders, leasing, energy savings performance contracts, which we call ESPCs. There's government loans or guarantees, utility loans, PACE fundings. As you can see, there's definitely a large amount of options that we have. Obviously, each option has certain advantages and certain limitations, but it's important to investigate the multiple financial options and carefully consider which alternative is most appropriate for you and your particular project. Now, the best energy efficiency financing mechanisms will definitely be a tailored solution that provides the maximum financial return for you. There are a number of considerations, however, that a building owner needs to assess to determine the most appropriate financing mechanism. You need to look at the total cost of the improvement project. You need to look at the constraints on internal capital availability. You need to look at the owner's balance sheet impact, looking at whether or not off-balance sheet funding is preferred or not preferred. Then we have preferred payment structures. There's preferred ownership status of the improvements and tax implications, available technical expertise for project support, and then there's always the responsibility for underperformance and the risk that might ensue. So these are some of the things that we should consider while looking at financing mechanisms and trying to see which one is really the most appropriate for the project that you are investing and creating. Now, looking at some of the best practices, there's a number of pre-financing and during financing levels and aspects that we can look into. During the pre-financing phase, you need to conduct an ASHRAE level 2 or 3 energy audit in order to identify baseline and pro forma energy years and energy savings opportunities. Here, during this stage, we'll also identify applicable government and utility grants, rebates, and the incentives that are out there. We will look at the energy conservation measures that meet the criteria, such as your return on investment, your payback time, and we'll determine the total project cost as well. Now, while you're financing the project, One of the things that we have to do is establish the amount of financing needed and the preferred payback time. For this, we need to obtain the cost and commitment from the insurance carrier who's offering energy savings insurance for this preferred payback period. You'd also have to solicit interest from lending sources, where you provide full documentation of the package, of the energy savings projections, etc. And finally, we have to secure financing under preferred terms. Now, during implementation, we're going to look at the energy cost measures on the engineering side and the design side, look at the installation costs, the commissioning costs, etc. We will also look at performance measurement and verification, which we conduct annually. And there's certain metrics we use to measure these increases in energy efficiencies. Now, what are some of the financing mechanisms that we see? Well, the most direct way is internal financing, and basically how this works is we can allocate funds from an internal capital or operating budget, and all the savings from increased energy efficiency can be retained by the building owner. There's several obstacles, however, as your cash reserves and your balance sheet must be very strong. Sometimes real estate ownership might be multi-party, so it gets a little bit complicated on the capital expenditure decisions. And there might be a ceiling on capital expenditures, or other company investments might be competing for internal capital. The final obstacle is as an owner, you assume 100% of any underperformance risk there might be. Debt financing is the direct financing through banks or other types of lenders, which is an alternative to internal funding. Again, plenty of obstacles. You have to look at the creditworthiness of the borrower. The mortgage documents often include restrictive language that can be associated incurring additional debt. Many building owners are owned by single-purpose LLCs or LPs with little credit and few assets, other than the property itself. And the debt servicing ratio might be unacceptable. A company may already have too much debt, be too highly leveraged, or be near its debt ceiling. Additional obstacles might be long-term borrowing for energy efficiency improvements are typically not available, as the financing period is generally between 1 and 5 years. And the borrower must invest in the upfront energy audit work to identify the energy saving opportunities and then determine the project cost from there. There's 100% financing of energy efficiency retrofit costs is not possible. And again, the borrower owns and assumes 100% of the risk for any underperformance that there might be. Now, looking at the lease or leasing purchase agreements, these agreements provide a means to reduce the upfront cost of capital for energy efficiency improvements. For building owners' equipment, leasing represents another financing source. These agreements are routinely offered by commercial leasing companies, management and financial companies, banks, investment firms, and equipment manufacturers. Some of the many obstacles that we see include, again, the building owner's creditworthiness. We see that the leasee has 100% of the underperformance risk again. Security is typically required, and financing can be expensive related to other options. Lease purchase instruments may require existing mortgage holder consent, and long-term lease periods are uncommon. Again, we see the typical financial payback period of being 1 to 5 years. And upfront investment for an energy audit might be required to identify energy savings opportunities. Now, a very common financing mechanism are what we call ESCOs, so energy service companies. Now, these represent a one-stop shop for project development and installation. However, many ESCOs can also assist with project financing as either an active or a passive party. So here, again, Obstacles might include performance. The performance guarantee is only as good as the financial strength of the ESCO. Energy efficiency retrofit projects typically need to be relatively large, normally greater than $1 million, in order to cover all the upfront expenses and administration costs with the ESCO. Again, there's also substantial negotiation and documentation throughout this process. And since energy savings often cannot be measured directly, since it's what we call an avoided cost, there's a lack of confidence in the energy savings verification process. The potential conflict of interest might also arise if the ESCO is verifying the performance of a system for which it has engineered, designed, and installed. And according to the Dodd-Frank Act, the SEC's proposed rule requiring registration of ESCOs as municipal advisors might limit the ability to originate loans on these financial projects. ESAs, looking at energy service agreements. A number of innovative managed energy service agreement structures are now being offered by third parties who develop projects, arrange or provide the capital, and manage the installed equipment. It is typically a pay-for-performance solution where energy efficiency is essentially being sold as a service. So building owners have no upfront cost, no capital requirement, and 100% of the project cost is financed. Now, these innovative agreements are distinct from traditional ESCO performance contracting in multiple respects. Energy efficiency service providers assume ownership and maintenance responsibility for project assets over the lifetime of the project. Building owners are not required to arrange their own financing and do not assume responsibility for principal and interest payments. Third, building owners do not bear the risk of whether an ESCO is willing and able to sit behind this performance guarantee. Energy efficiency service providers are compensated only if energy savings are realized. And lastly, we might see that building owner payments to the energy efficiency service providers are viewed as as operating expenses. Moving on. Additional differences that we see are that managed energy service agreements commits a landlord to pay historical energy use, adjusted for weather and occupancy, for a fixed period of time, and makes the energy efficiency supplier responsible for paying the actual energy bill. The landlord doesn't have to rely on restrictive capital recovery provisions in the leases, and the services contract doesn't impose any liens or debt on the building, preventing the problem of the primary mortgage lender. At the end of the contract, the building owner owns the energy efficiency equipment and inherits a substantially reduced energy bills. So, MESAs don't require landlord capital or increased operating expenses, and they provide benefit without as much financial risk. Now, what are some of the obstacles that we see with energy service agreements? Well, there's substantial negotiation and documentation is typically required. Energy efficiency retrofit projects generally need to be relatively large, preferably greater than $200,000, in order to cover up all the upfront expenses and administration costs. Annual energy expenditures need to be relatively high, preferably approaching $1 million per year, and private financing provided through ESA managers may not offer the lowest interest rates, depending on the source of funding that you find. Now, since energy savings often cannot be measured directly, as we said before, there's a lack of confidence again in the energy savings verification process. And again, the potential conflict of interest exists if the ESA manager is also verifying the performance of a system for which it has responsibility. We see the contract period as again, no more than 10 years, so a relatively short amount of payback time and of contract time. And there's a lack of a strong experience base for most of these innovative structures are relatively new. So moving on to government loan programs. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act allocated $11.6 billion in the fiscal year of 2010 to state and local governments to finance energy efficiency programs. Now, the Small Business Administration has a loan program for financing energy efficiency improvements. FHA and HUD also have programs to provide additional capital on favorable terms for multifamily energy efficiency retrofits. President Obama's Better Building Initiative, announced in February of 2011, calls for a federal loan guarantee program run through the U.S. Department of Energy to encourage private lenders. Now, the U.S. Department of Energy is implementing a pilot program to guarantee energy loans that are designed to make the credit rating for small and medium-sized businesses far more appealing to lenders. There's also plenty of rebates and tax incentives in addition to loans, as well as utilities frequently offer rebates, grants, or tax incentives that promote energy efficiency investment. Such incentives are designed to make energy efficiency retrofit investments more attractive by improving the rate of return and the rate of investment and payback term. However, program funding is definitely limited. There are no guarantees that program funding will be renewed. There are fees associated with loan guarantees. The loan guarantees don't cover 100% of the project cost. There may be statutes that limit local government from lending public money. There's extensive paperwork and documentation that is typically involved with this process, especially when we're dealing with tax credits. 100% financing is not usually available, and typically not more than 80%. Energy efficiency improvements must also be eligible for funding in the program. There are caps on the size of a loan, which can be relatively low. And again, we see loan payback periods being relatively short. So, property assessed clean energy programs, frequently referred to as PACE. PACE programs, also referred to as tax lien financing, allow local governments authorized by state law to fund energy improvements on commercial and industrial properties via an additional assessment on the property tax bill for a lower cost of capital over a longer term, usually between 10 to 20 years. PACE financing also transfers with sale of the building, so the future owners or tenants assume the payments, but at the same time receive the savings benefit. In PACE programs, the loan is secured by a lien on the owner's property and is paid back via a charge on the owner's property tax bill. There are plenty of obstacles again that we see, including caps on the loan size, relatively short-term repayment periods. The borrower assumes 100% of the underperformance risk. We have to look at the credit worthiness of the borrower, and there may be restrictive language related to incurring additional debt in borrowing mortgage documents. And lastly, the borrower must invest in the upfront energy audit in order to identify the energy savings and opportunities, which will then determine the project costs. On-bill utility financing. So utility bill financing is a financing alternative under which the utility or a third-party financer provides the upfront capital for an energy efficiency upgrade. The building owner repays the investment through a charge on their monthly utility bill, and the program offers a low or no interest loans over relatively short repayment periods. The primary purpose of utility incentives here is to lower the peak demand. Again, we see caps on loan size, short repayment periods. The borrower assumes underperformance risk. We have to look at the credit worthiness of the borrower. We see restrictive language, and the borrower must invest in the upfront energy audit in order to find these and identify these saving opportunities. And there is a lack of experience in the industry, as most of these programs are relatively new. Looking at incentives, grants, and rebates, there are a lot of New York City programs. Just to list a few, we have the New York Industrial Retention Network, North Brooklyn Energy Grant, Energy Cost Saving Programs, Empire Zone Program, Industrial and Commercial Incentive Program, the Industrial and Technology Assistance Corporation, the NYC Economic Development Corporation, the NYC Tax Abatements. We can keep going on looking at all the NYSERDA programs, which include the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority for multifamily performance programs. We can look at the Energy Smart for new construction programs, existing facilities programs. And we could look at Con Edison. Con Edison also has many programs such as the Commercial and Industrial Energy Efficiency Program, multifamily energy efficiency incentives, electric and gas rebate, and there's custom programs, prescriptive programs. The theme being that there are plenty of incentives, grants, and rebates available for all types of projects, for all types of consumers, and you just have to find them. Now, federal programs, we can look at the HUD Green Retrofit Program. We've spoken about the Energy Policy Act, the Energy Efficient Commercial Buildings Tax Deduction, and Business Energy Investment Tax Credit. So summing up what we've been talking about a little bit, financing options for energy efficiency projects are highly diverse, with each offering has specific pros and cons. Guiding our clients through this process is one of the core specialties of Associated Renewable. We are able to ensure a perfect match between the comprehensive financing project and model chosen and the specific situation that is required for each client. We include complete management for each client's submissions for properly selected rebates, grants, incentives, etc. Now, I want to thank you for sitting in on our webinar, and if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand now or email us at finance@associatedrenewable.com.